Okay.
But it was great at the time. About half the professors at the time were still biblical and orthodox, um, and it had the same philosophical roots that Schaeffer had. When I say that Schaeffer understood the fact value split before Americans did, it's because he was living in Europe. Um, and there was a Dutch philosopher who was a Christian whose name was Herman Dooyeweerd. Dooye,
Mm-hmm.
D-O-O. You, you
Mm-hmm.
know this name, Dooyeweerd. So that the double vowels is very Dutch. But Dooyeweerd was the first systematic. He was the first. You have to realize he was the first systematic uh, Protestant philosopher. So we've had a lot of philosophical philosophy professors, historians of philosophy. But in terms of somebody who said, "Hey, I'm going to construct what I think is a biblical philosophy," Dooyeweerd is the only one we have
Huh.
as Protestants, and
Interesting.
he's worth, yeah, he's worth knowing for that reason alone. And he was the one who influenced Schaeffer then.
Gotcha.
So a lot
That
of
makes
Schaeffer.
sense.
So if you read Schaeffer and then you would read Dooyeweerd, you say, okay, Schaeffer was sort of the popularized version of Dooyeweerd.
Oh, that's good to know. I didn't
And
know
if you
that.
so if you want to go beyond Schaeffer and say, well, where did
Okay.
you asked me where I went intellectually after Labrie. Well, I kept saying, where did Schaeffer get this? Where did
Gotcha.
he get this? I want to know the sources. I want to go back behind Schaeffer and find out where he got this stuff. And a lot of people didn't do that. But Dooyeweerd was one of his most important sources. Um, so, and Dooyeweerd was the inspiration for this Christian graduate school in Toronto. So
Oh,
there's the
gotcha.
connection. So by
Okay.
going to Toronto, we were able to dig more deeply into Dooyeweerd's
Gotcha.
thought, which was therefore digging into the sources of Schaeffer's thought.
That makes
So
sense.
doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's actually called Dooyeweerd's philosophy is called Reformational philosophy because they were in a sense trying to go back to the Reformation. You remember the Reformation was about saying, okay, medieval Christian thought was largely dominated by Greek philosophy. When the early church said, hey, we've got a new theology, but how do we express it philosophically? Many of them picked up Neoplatonism was the most popular philosophy
Okay.
through the Middle Ages. And then Aquinas, in the days of Aquinas, Aristotle was being rediscovered. So Aquinas, in a sense, Christianizes Aristotle. And then the Reformation comes along and says, why are you guys connecting Christianity to these pagan philosophies, right? Don't we have a truly biblical philosophy? So that's been in a sense that's been the goal of Protestants all along. Unfortunately, they didn't really succeed. After the
Sure.
Reformation, they went back to teaching scholasticism in the Protestant universities.
Hmm.
Um, but that was the goal, and that's what Dooyeweerd's goal was. So he was writing in the late 19th, early 20th century,
Interesting.
and he was trying to
Hmm.
recover that goal. He was trying to recover: is there a distinctively biblical philosophy, or do we have to rely, like the Middle Ages did, on Plato and Aristotle? I mean, can't we? Isn't there a biblical philosophy? And that's what he was trying to do. I have to tell you, in many ways, then he was like all of us. He was still a child of his times, and so he kind of um, a lot of his influence were phenomenology, for example,
Oh, gotcha.
and a lot of Catholic thinkers are influenced by phenomenology. A lot of them think that of all the isms out there, um, that phenomenology is perhaps the most compatible with Christianity. Secular phenomenologists have complained about what they call the theological turn. That's a term they've used. The theological turn within phenomenology, because there's so many Christians who are phenomenologists and who are interpreting it within a Christian perspective. So Dooyeweerd would fall into that category to some degree, just to just as a heads up. But
Okay.
that was what that's what we did when we went to Toronto. It was called the Institute for Christian Studies. It was an offshoot of the Free University of Amsterdam, which Dooyeweerd had started. And so it taught this Dooyeweerdian philosophy, which was, in a sense, the metaphysics behind what Schaeffer said.
Gotcha.
So
That
that's how I went
yeah,
further.
that's super fascinating. I had no idea that was his connection. I've read some of his stuff, seen him cited, but that makes a lot of sense of the thinking behind him.